Good morning, everyone. Perhaps a good afternoon and a good evening to those operating from outside of Ghana. And you're all welcome to this, what I consider to be potentially very interesting discussion on beyond Ghana's 2024 election. Should we do business as usual? Or should we be carving a new path towards the people-centered politics? I am Abna Enimwa Yabua Benin. I teach at the University of Ghana's Department of Communication Studies, and I'm very happy to join you all, but also to serve as moderator for this discussion. I hope that it will be a discussion that will be worth our while, all of us. It certainly promises to do so given the topic on the floor. Now, as a citizen of Ghana, I have often caught myself worrying that our democracy is not exactly delivering to purpose. Don't get me wrong, I'm very excited about the opportunity to freely speak whatever is on my mind and to have other people do same. So I'm excited that our democracy allows free speech and all the other benefits that come with it. But as a citizen, it bothers me that I seem to only become of interest to our political class every 4 years, once every 4 years, when there's an election impending. They come with gifts, they come canvassing, and that is when perhaps we get close contact with them. Thereafter, we wait for the next 4 years for us to become relevant to them. I believe this is not the ideal, and it's certainly probably not what those who moved us towards democracy had dreamed for us. I'm sure there are people in this conversation who have similar sentiments. So perhaps you join me in my interest in this discussion about how do we move our democracy forward and turn it into something that services our interests as a people beyond elections. In between 4 years when we have elections, how do we get our political leaders to pay better attention to our needs, to keep closer contact with us, and to stay relevant in our lives? Because it would seem that they are increasingly becoming irrelevant in the daily lived experiences of Ghanaians. The conversation on what should happen beyond politics, whether we should keep it at business as usual or we should carve a new path towards people-centered politics, is better had with people who have been dabbling in this space and who have some insightful knowledge to share. This morning, we are joined by 5 speakers who will help us think around how do we move our democracy to a point where it better serves its people. We'll have Professor Emmanuel Kwesi Enin. He's an accomplished and distinguished scholar in African security and international politics. He will share a few thoughts with us. We'll also have Ms. Mavis Zupok Dome, a senior research analyst at the African Center for Democracy, CDD and Development, sorry. Then we'll also have Mr. Benjamin Ofe-Addo. Benjamin Ofe-Addo is a seasoned finance expert, but he's also a media practitioner. So very interesting blend there. And we'll look to him calling on his 2 areas of expertise to share some thoughts on this topic. We also have Mrs. Mary Awelana Ada. She's the executive director of the Ghana Integrity Initiative. And finally, we have the founder of the African Center for Alternative Politics and Security, Dr. Mohammed Suleiman. So these are the 5 people who will be helping us share ideas so that perhaps we inch Ghana closer to a democracy that is beyond electocracy. I'll start the discussion by inviting Professor Kwesi Enin to share a few thoughts. And Prof, if you can keep it within about 8 minutes to 10 minutes for us, we'll be very grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And let me say a very good morning to all the speakers and participants. I think today marks yet another day in the official introduction and launch of the Center for Alternative Politics and Security. And I think the very name captures the essence of what this center seeks to do. And for me, the critical discursive word here is alternative. And I think it fits quite nicely into the historical period in which we find ourselves. But even more importantly, the title for today's conversation, Beyond Ghana's 2024 elections, business as usual or people-centered politics. Chair, there is no doubt at all in my mind that as we celebrate Ghana's democracy, that after almost 32 years, we've reached a divergent point where we need some reflection and some consideration as to whether this is the democracy that we want, as to whether this is the democracy that will take us to the next stage of our politics, of our development, and even more importantly, creating a stable, enabling, conducive, convivial environment that is dialogic and consensual in creating the spaces that allows us to talk. There's no doubt at all that we need a new type of politics necessary both for Ghana and for West Africa. But to do that, I'll argue we need a change in attitude and actually the understandings around what politics must do. And I like, Chair, your introductory remarks about that we don't see politicians until they want our vote again. They come and play Father and Mother Christmas, and then off they go again. So there is a need for some conversation and reflection about the type of politics that we are looking for. And I want to focus my next couple of minutes comments on one particular word in politics that I think will move us beyond the elections that are coming in December. And that word is participation, or let me add political to it, so the words become political participation. I think there is no doubt at all in any of our minds that democracies depend on the active and informed involvement of citizen participation. Citizen participation across the spectrum of political processes. Now, this is important as citizens' participation brings in buy-in, it brings in engagement, but it also brings credibility. Limited popular participation, as we see in Ghana, and Chair, as you mentioned, leads to a dangerous situation that undermines resilient institutions and sustainability. And it gives way to a particular type of politics where elites and powerful people and interest groups, either through money or whatever, and unrepresentative coalitions make them their decisions for us. And Chair, I was struck by your introductory remarks because that is what seems to be happening. Small, exclusive elitist groups using the language of democracy to win votes, but not acting in the democratic, inclusive interest of people. So participation by citizens becomes key in ensuring that democracies do function. And moving beyond the elections itself next month, I think citizens must play this role over the 4-year period. And how can we do this as citizens? I think we need to contextualize the word participation because it encapsulates the involvement, but also the cooperation of individuals and groups in the decision-making process. Political participation, I argue, focuses on the activities that impact on and affect politics, but includes, amongst other actions, the active engagement either by taking part in political activities, but also it comprises activities by private citizens in all shapes and forms. But that it is voluntary, and it is that voluntarism aspect that we seem to have lost in Ghana because everything now has a price. So this today is exciting, and I think we all have a basis to support this particular process. I'm very excited about this in launching the Center for Alternative Politics and Security. But in all my work, Chair, I have been guided, encouraged, and supported by the soaring lyrics of our own national anthem that people usually forget. And I want to remind all of us that in being active citizen participants in our democracy, that we should be bold to defend forever the cause of freedom and of right, cherishing fearless honesty and resisting the oppressor's rule with all our will and with all our might, steadfast to build together a nation strong in unity. So let me thank all of you for this initiative and for the official launch and introduction of the Center for Alternative Politics and Security to a wider public. We all have a reason to be optimistic, to be hopeful. But to reach that end, we need to work hard. It will take sacrifices. It will take focus, and it will take determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Enin, for the insightful thoughts. I'll move now to Ms. Mavis Zupok Dom. Mavis, am I mentioning your name correctly?
Yes, the domain is domain like Accra domain, yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm so sorry for butchering.
No, it's fine.
So let's invite Ms. Mavis Zupok Dome. She's a senior research analyst at the CDD. Mavis, your thoughts?
Thank you, Prof. So I would mostly, my thoughts are informed around our various surveys, Afrobarometer surveys over the years on some of these issues. And I'll be sharing the data, particularly from our last two surveys, that is the round 9 and round 10. Round 10, I'll not share much, just what is in the public domain. We are still working on it, so I will share mostly from round 9. And Prof. Enim really spoke to some of the issues when he talked about participation. Generally, when we look at 32 years of democracy, what are Ghanaians thinking? There is still, the positive of it is that there's still high demand for democracy. Citizens still support democracy as a form of rule. But the question as to whether citizens still think, citizens toss around whether Ghana is a full democracy or a democracy with major problems or not a democracy at all, then we see that from, in fact, I'll say from round 9, you will see declining trends in the perceptions that the country is actually a democracy. And this is most worrying where we see percentages of 81% now lowering to 61% saying that Ghana is a full democracy. When you look at also satisfaction, and you look at satisfaction with the way democracy works in Ghana, again, that have decreased over time. Citizens who say that they are fairly satisfied or very satisfied with the way democracy works, you would see the percentages decreasing, particularly up to 2022, we have 51%. So when you look at this, then the question around what could be the problem? When you look at political freedoms, the data shows that citizens' perceptions are that they have political freedoms. Majority of citizens say that they have the freedom to choose who they vote for. 96%, that's almost 10 in 10. They have freedom to join any political organization. They have freedoms to say what they think. Now, but when it comes to, okay, so we have freedom to say what we think and join any political organization. Are we taking advantage of this and participating in the governance space and political space? One of the frequent questions that Afrobarometer usually asks over time is whether citizens have attended any community meeting, join others to raise an issue. And you see what those who would say always, often, are less than 2 in 10 Ghanaians, are less than 20%. But those who say they have not attended meetings are on the high side, that they have never attended meeting. Now, whether they have raised issues, they have taken issues to any government official, contacted a traditional leader, assembly member, or their member of parliament, again, you see the same trend. A lot of people do not engage with the government officials. The percentages that say they have often engaged are less than 20%. The percentages that say they have contacted their assembly persons often or once is about 36% when you take the 2022 data. Percentages that have contacted their member of parliament is even much lower. You have 14%. This really shows a worrying trend. However, for our every 4 years popular participation, we see high percentages around there. So Ghanaians do love to vote. We have, if voted in the last election, that is the 2020 election, 81% indicated that they voted in the election. That is from the 2022 data. So it begs the question of what could be some of the issues that are really driving this. And if you look, Afrobarometer data also shows that clearly there are some issues that make Ghanaians not want to engage or not satisfied with the way democracy is supposed to bring development. Now, one of the things that we track is what is the most important problem that you want your government to address. Over time, particularly from 2022, management of the economy, education, healthcare, water supply, and infrastructure development have been constantly mentioned as issues that they want government to address. They are like the top 5, even though which comes first have varied over time. But really, these are always the issues. But if you look at the top 3, they usually have management of the economy, unemployment, healthcare, usually going toe to toe, and then infrastructure always coming as the top 3 when asked these questions. Levels of poverty from our survey, we usually have a question that assess citizen access to basic needs, that is cooking for food, cash income, water, and all that. And then we use that to calculate a lived experience in poverty, which we say poverty that you have experienced over the year. And when you look, when I look closely at that data, it also shows clearly that even in the recent data, because this is in the public domain, so I can share this, in the recent data shows that the number of citizens who said they have experienced poverty, the moderate and high lived poverty, have increased. This increase started in 2017 from 17% And now we are at a 45% of citizens saying they experience poverty. This generally, the ratings of government on performance too have declined. The positive ratings have declined, and while the negative ratings have increased. If you look at this engagement, particularly among youth and women, they tend not to engage the government or their officials that much. Now, let's also using the data to look at issues around corruption. The perception that level of corruption have increased, have actually the number of the citizens that say that number of corruption have increased in Ghana, level of corruption have increased and have also increased. Now we are at a high percentage of 74% of Ghanaians saying that level of corruption have increased in our recent survey compared to the 2022 data. And here, only 26% in our recent data, that is the 2024 data, shows that Ghanaians feel confident to report corruption without fear of retaliation, which is a big concern when we want to look at accountability and then transparency. So generally, these are some of the issues, and I'll delve more into some of whether citizens feel that they can access information or leaders listen. When asked around the issues of whether they are likely to get information that they need if they contacted their local government for plans and budgets, only 19% indicate that they feel they can get such information. Only 27% said they feel they can get access to school budgets. And then only 17% also indicates that they can get access to government contracts. That is from our 2022 data. As to whether they are likely to get somebody to take action, should they request for assistance from their local government, development assistance from their local government, our 2022 data shows that only 30% indicates that they are likely to get the action taken on their development needs. Report on corruption. If you report corruption, are you likely to get action taken? Only 25% say they are likely to get action taken. And we have 70% saying that they do not think they can get any action taken if they reported this. Do their leaders listen? Looking at the MPs and local government, our 2022 data shows that only 40% feel that their MPs listen often, and then only 35% feel that their local government, that is the assembly persons, listen. Trust also in institutions have really dived down over the past 10 years, particularly trust in public institutions. We see a lot of decline in the perception of public institutions, trust in public institutions somewhat and a lot, which is a very worrying trend. We have between 2012 and 2024, you see percentages drop ranging between 14 and 28% when you look at member of parliament, when you look at presidency, court, electoral commission, Ghana Armed Force, the ruling party, opposition party, which should be a thing of worry. But generally, we do have the support for the election going for us. People still support elections as the form of selecting leaders for the country over time. And yes, citizens still believe that their votes they can cast their votes in secrecy and no big person would get to know, powerful person would get to know who they voted for. So, but when you look at particularly, even though citizens have reported, high percentage of citizens have reported having voted, particularly when you take our 2024 data, when you look at voter apathy, it is growing. When you compare over time, it is growing. and the high percentages of voter apathy is around the youth and women who tend not to want to participate in these, and just the same way as in participating in civic spaces. So for what can we do differently? Well, for now, we have the affirmative action bill going for us. However, that means that we need to implement this affirmative action through, we will have to think about implementation framework. We have to think about resource allocation, monitoring, and evaluation, bringing together various stakeholders to be part of this. We have to think about empowering and engaging civil society. We need to look at how, especially civil society that promote marginalized group participation, engagement, and general participation and governance space. We should look at introducing a framework for consultancy, a framework for engagement, a structured framework for engagement, such that not only when manifestos are brought forward for us to vote for, that it's just being implemented, but at least there'll be a lot of engagements on this to inform and firm up the policy, the framework, and then the implementation of such policies. Getting citizens more involved, we need to think around innovations, we need to think around digitalization as well. The Afrobarometer data shows that more and more citizens are beginning to access, more citizens of course have access to smartphones, and they begin to access their news using internet. How do we leverage on these, that we can get more information to citizens, get them informed about government process, get them involved about government? How do we build? We need to build systems where we can actually use online platforms to be able to get citizens engaged in the governance processes. Even grievance mechanisms, can we have such platforms for grievance mechanisms? There are a lot of efforts. I know there are civil society efforts around, I know Mary will talk about that, around reporting corruption. But from the government side, how can we get this up? And so I'll end and say that for going forward, it shouldn't just be about the manifesto, because citizens are really growing dissatisfied. There's so much growing dissatisfaction. We need to look at how best to engage citizens, create knowledge and awareness on civic responsibilities and duties, and why citizens need to engage, and not leave only the plan for development and the development of the country to the politician. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mavis. Very, very helpful insights you have shared. Mohammed, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, okay. So very good insight you have shared about the Afrobarometer, and I take from it the fact that while Ghanaians love to have their democracy, satisfaction in it is waning. Satisfaction is declining, which is obviously a problem, because we don't want the day to come when we are so dissatisfied with it that we start thinking alternatives that may not be as pleasant. But I also hear you share some solution pathways, that perhaps the way to go forward is to empower civil society to engender more participation. And Professor Enin spoke about the need for an actively participating citizenry, and also what we could do with the affirmative action and gender equity law. So thank you very much, Mavis. I would go now to Benjamin, who is a seasoned finance expert and also a media practitioner, and hope that Benjamin will give me or give us a few more solutions. What, for instance, can we do in terms of building literacy that enables citizens to hold power to account. So what role, for instance, would financial literacy have in here? But also what role should media literacy have? And what can the media do to help us all get to a place where we can hold our political class accountable? So I'll go to Benjamin Ofe Ado. Ben, are you able to hear me? And you can take over. You have 8 minutes to speak. Thank you.
So let me just say by way of opening that I'll be speaking specifically to how citizens can hold leaders accountable in this country now and the future under the broader topic that we are looking at. And just by way of beginning, I would want to mention that in addition to me being a finance professional and a media practitioner, I'm also a student of the law. I'm currently taking my professional law course at the Ghana School of Law. So I'll try to marry all three to give us some solutions as far as accountability is concerned. And I would want to thank once again the organizers for inviting me to speak on this all-important matter of our country. And I must say that in my short life as a Ghanaian youth, my education, training, and professional life, they've been about optimally developing and then managing both human and non-human resources. Also advocating for the citizenry to achieve our national aspirations, and also holding duty bearers to strict accountability, be it in economics, finance, accounting, the law, or in my work in the media. So the topic of accountability is very much second nature to me. And I must say that as a finance professional and a student of economics, I would want to begin by borrowing some words of wisdom from economics to set the tone. The phenomenon of market structures, they provide valuable insight into how power dynamics operate between buyers and sellers. And as we'll be seeing in a few minutes, these structures closely mirror our political realities, all right? So let me start with the market structure known as perfect competition. So in a perfectly competitive market, there are many buyers and sellers, each with negligible influence on the price or quality of goods and services. So sellers are thereby incentivized to innovate and lower costs in order to be able to stay competitive, because they cannot determine price. So if they can lower costs and be competitive, then they can make better margins. While this system encourages efficiency, it has a certain low side where it often struggles with coordination, making it hard to maintain quality standards and long-term investments because of the multiplicity of the various actors, both sellers and buyers. And at the opposite extreme of a perfectly competitive market is a monopoly, where a single seller dominates the market. And monopolies maximize their power by dictating price and quality, often to the detriment of consumers or buyers. And while they can efficiently scale operations because it is just them providing the service in the market and deliver consistent products, the lack of competition can lead to inefficiency, complacency, and exploitation of the buyers or consumers. But then between these two extremes, that is the perfectly competitive markets and the monopoly, lies what we call oligopoly. And this market structure is characterized by a few dominant sellers. This system fosters collaboration between competitors to stabilize the market, but it can also lead to price fixing, where you can have the sellers colluding to determine a certain price that will be profitable to them and not necessarily efficient for the market. And they also can reduce innovation. And in the political sense, this structure resonates significantly with Ghana's political system under the Fourth Republic. Now, as a subset of oligopoly is what we call a duopoly, which involves just two dominant sellers. So while competition between the two might seem fierce, they often prioritize their mutual survival over consumer welfare or the buyer's welfare. And this mirrors Ghana's current political reality, where two dominant parties alternate power, largely sidelining smaller parties and independent candidates. Then there's a final one I'm going to talk to us about. You see, that one is called the monopsony. And that one flips the script in the case of a monopoly. So a monopsony is a situation where you have a single buyer who dominates the market, granting it substantial leverage over sellers. In the political analogy of it, citizens as buyers in a unified monopsony could wield collective power to man accountability and prioritize their interests. And while monopsonies can lower costs and enforce standards, their risk efficiency and over-centralization if the buyer lacks coordination, or they risk, I should say, inefficiency and over-centralization if the buyer lacks coordination and clear purpose. I'm sure by now your minds are getting to picture the Ghanaian political system within the context of these market structures that I've spoken about. Now let's go to our constitution and look at the Ghanaian political landscape. Our 1992 constitution outlines the various arrangements as far as political operations and democratic market is concerned. Article 3, Clause 1 of the 1992 Constitution provides that Parliament shall have no power to enact a law establishing a one-party state. In essence, that is to outlaw the possibility of a political monopoly, ensuring that no single party can have indefinite dominance. Then when you move to Article 55, Clause 1, it provides that the right to form political parties is hereby guaranteed. And reading that also together with Clause 2 of Article 55, which stipulates that every citizen of Ghana of voting age has the right to join a political party, you do realize that the combined effect of these two clauses of Article 55, they set the foundation for a perfectly competitive political market, granting the right to form political parties with free entry and exit to various actors. However, when you come further down that article, Article 55, Clause 7b provides that for purposes of registration, a prospective political party shall furnish the Electoral Commission with a copy of its constitution and the names and addresses of its national officers, and shall satisfy the commission that the party has branches in all regions of Ghana and is, in addition, and this is where the meat is, organized in not less than 2/3 of all the districts in each region. So these stringent requirements for national character and infrastructure elevate the barriers to entry. And so it creates an oligopoly where you have a few political parties. And despite the theoretical pluralism, which our constitution sets out, that Ghana shall not be a one-party state, but shall be a multi-party state, our democracy has evolved into a duopoly over the Fourth Republic's 8 elections. And we can see that two dominant parties have monopolized power with no other power or independent candidate achieving more than 5% of the vote since 1992's elections. This duopoly extends into parliament, and we see it evident in the 8th parliament, where only one independent candidate currently sits alongside members of the two major parties. And even that one independent candidate really is a member or has been a member of one of the two political parties. And you know, the challenge with this duopoly as we have it is that it gives disproportionate power to political parties, reducing citizens to passive participants in the democratic process. And this, you can tell, creates a situation where the governed do not have sufficient power to put accountable the governors. And so you know, this imbalance is further exacerbated by a number of things, and I'll take you through them quickly. There's excessive presidential powers as far as our 1992 constitution is concerned. you look at the president wielding immense power, appointing critical accountability officers, including the Auditor General, the Special Prosecutor, the Inspector General of Police, the chairperson of SHRAJ, and even in the Electoral Commission. And in very recent time this matter has become very thorny, the appointment of justices to the Supreme Court. And you know, while the Constitution provides for separation of powers, the extent of discretionary leeway in these appointments seem to undermine their independence, leaving the citizenry without adequate checks on the executive authority. And let me cite an example. When you look at Chapter 10 of the Constitution, which deals with the judiciary, it stipulates that the justices of the Supreme Court shall be appointed by the president upon the advice of the Judicial Council in consultation with the Council of State and upon the approval of Parliament. What has also been determined in the Supreme Court are left at advice and consult because they are not compelling. So the Judicial Council can advise the president to make a certain appointment to the Supreme Court, but the president is not compelled to make such an appointment. So you see the discretionary leeway, even amidst the checks and balances that the Constitution provides for. Again, we seem to have weak local governance. And you heard from the presentation from the Afrobarometer that a number of the respondents felt that they don't have enough power to hold their local officers to task. We have a situation where the Constitution stipulates that the president shall appoint all MMDCs, and this removes local government accountability from the constituent, further centralizing power and disconnecting governance from grassroots concerns. And very much hammered is the issue of media polarization and the role of the media. You know, while Ghana boasts of a liberalized media landscape, ownership and control of a lot of our media houses, if not most, is by politically exposed persons. And this significantly undermines the media's independence, credibility, and ability to really hold authority to power. Role as a watchdog is therefore compromised. And this allows political narratives to dominate over citizens' interests. And I'll talk about the last group being the parliament. When you look at chapter 8 of the Constitution, in fact, sorry, chapter 9 of the Constitution, you do realize that the legislature also has the additional responsibility, aside from legislating, to also exercise a certain oversight over the executive. However, the same Constitution stipulates that the president, in his appointment of ministers of state, shall appoint not less than 50% of all his ministers of state from Parliament. What that does is it creates a situation of conflict of interest for parliamentarians, because a number of people who are fighting to go to Parliament, even in this election, whose primary intent is so that they will be more eligible to be appointed ministers of state should their party win the presidential slot. What that does is it compromises and weakens the power of Parliament as well when it comes to accountability. And so you realize that systemically, the powers available to us as a people enshrined in the Constitution and other forms of legislation have been significantly weakened. So how do we shift this balance and turn the power to the people as opposed to the governors? A number of suggestions. We need to find a way of building. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, and I'll be grateful if you can put the suggestions in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Great, I'll do that. So the first would be that we building a political monopsony where there is unity of purpose, aspirations, and actions by the people. Because once we are fragmented, then the political class can take advantage of us and keep on playing us to an electocracy, as you suggested in your introductory remark. Significantly also, we need to push for the constitutional reforms. The decentralization issue where MMDCs are elected should be brought to the front burner again. There should be checks on presidential powers where we set up an independent, non-partisan bodies to be the appointing bodies for certain critical accountability offices like SHRAJ, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, a number of, in fact, even the appointment of justices to the Supreme Court to build a certain level of confidence within the citizenry. And about media independence and alignment, I propose that the NMC of necessity should have some form of appointment onto the boards of directors for all of these media organizations to play a further watchdog role so that the political owners do not continually dictate the narrative as far as the media is concerned. To conclude, I need to say that 2024 is not the magical turning point we might hope for. It is the choices we make and the deliberate actions we take as citizens and as a state that will drive change. Elections may mark the start of new administrations, but they are not the end game. Ghana's democracy can only move from business as usual to people-centered politics if we, the citizenry, stand united and uncompromising in demanding accountability. As the saying goes, power concedes nothing without a demand, unquote. And if we don't make that demand, the political duopoly will continue to sell us the same product, just in different packaging. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Ben. A lesson in economics, duopoly, monopoly, oligopoly, and the many polies. But very, very interesting thoughts in connecting the dots between the market structures that underpin our democracy and the constitutional guarantees that were supposed to frame these market structures, but which perhaps seem to have shot themselves in the foot by other provisions that open the space for gaps to emerge. So the Constitution, while it wants a certain perfect market, or at least oligopoly, has set itself up so that there are fault lines, which has led us to a situation where MPP and NDC are playing a ball with us. This one passes it on, the next 8 years, the next party passes it on. We are in trouble, but I like some of the suggestions you've made, some of which perhaps have come onto the table in the past. The urgent need to revisit our constitution and frame a better one that can move this country forward. And then some considerations for local governance, improving the structures of our local governance. Prof. Enin spoke about participation. Mavis gave us evidence on participation or the lack thereof, and you center local governance. So we really need to revisit that space. So for the Center for Alternative Politics and Security, West Africa, this is food for your future in terms of some activities that perhaps energy should go on to. So next, let me invite Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for those insights. I'll go to Mary Awelana Ada. She's the Executive Director of the Ghana Integrity Initiative. And our hope is that Mary will be able to share a few thoughts still on the accountability, but also how do we move our leadership class to be a bit more minded ethically towards our well-being. Mary, if you're listening to me, you can take over for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all, and thanks to the organizers for considering the Ghana Integrity Initiative in this webinar. Sorry, my voice is a little hoarse because I have a cold. But then to initiate this conversation, I believe the speakers before have put it very well. And I would want to contextualize the topic for which I am speaking to today. That is fighting corruption and strengthening accountability in Ghana's post-election democracy. We all agree that corruption has disastrous consequences on society. And for Ghana, in our current dispensation or in the 32 years of our Fourth Republic, we have seen these disastrous consequences manifest in the lives of the people. Most researchers and also most of the institutions that are in charge of the fight against corruption have documented over time how significantly this challenge remains. And when the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, the 10-year plan, which we just finished implemented, was drafted, some of these challenges were brought to bear. A low level of accountability, issues around political corruption, issues around demonetization and increasingly monetized politics, the lack of a campaign financing regime were cited as some of the issues that continue to contribute to the challenges of our democracy when it comes to the fight against corruption. Increasingly, data from the Corruption Perception Index have also shown that the evidence of our fight against corruption is not too good. With the past 4 years, Ghana remaining at a score of 43. And in many instances, the trend has shown that when countries remain on the same score for a long time, the potential to reduce or even go further down is very high. And this we have continuously spoken to. However, not much has been done because we continue to see a lot of clientelism and patrimonialism. Politicians or our leaders often engage in corrupt practices to maintain power. And we have seen increasingly the issues around mobilizing support and then also distributing favors. If you are in Ghana today, you would agree with me that when you go around, because of the campaigns that are going on, you see a lot of issues around vote buying, a lot of vote selling as well going on, because the citizenry has come to a point where they believe that it is during this season that their cocoa is ripe. And so they must find a way of maximizing their benefits before the season elapses. Unfortunate as it is, this is what we have seen. And as well, because of the entrenched economic marginalization and the issues around survival, increasingly we have seen that voters are also selling their votes. We also see, as the previous speaker spoke to, the excessive executive power, making sure that we have diminished accountability when it comes to allowing corruption or anti-corruption behavior to thrive. Institutional weaknesses have also shown further exhibiting that there is a lot of work to be done in this arena. Let me quickly say that because we've identified some of these challenges over time, one of the things the Ghana Integrity Initiative and its partners, civil society organizations have done during this cycle of the development of manifestos and previous ones. And this cycle I mentioned specifically because we did a lot of work in, is to bring to bear some of the gaps in our legislations, in our policy and in practice, so that the political parties are minded by these and then they take them into consideration when they put up their manifestos. And critical amongst these gaps we put out there for consideration was the issue around our political financing regime. The lack of transparency in our campaigning, it creates a lot of avenues for illicit funding and undue influence. We have seen a lot of strategic organized crime manifesting and also increasing, because we see Galamsey, yes, funding some of the political parties and the rest. We also see that the regime around political parties, when it comes to accountability, is low. And so we propose that instead of having the political parties rendering accounts as the Political Parties Act speaks to, we should get to a stage where through policy, we have some level of accountability where the members or the candidates who are vying for parliament also have some accountability, because we know that it is within this level that a lot of donations come. And then we also made proposals for ensuring that we look at the issues around abuse or incumbency abuse or abuse of state resources. A lot of work has been done on this over the years, and we brought it to bear. Then we see a gap around the disclosure regimes when it comes to assets. Assets and liabilities disclosure only has us declaring, and then there is no verification. There's also no publication, meaning that people can already front load what they want to have and work towards achieving this without the citizen being able to verify and also play their role of oversight. Then we see weaknesses in institutional oversight over time, which we have brought to attention. And so we also talked about the issue around the COPO, which was started in 2013 and is yet to pass. That's the Conduct of Public Officers Bill. We continue to see this low level of accountability as well, I mentioned, due to some of the critical challenges we have spoken to. And so we talked to most of the political parties, some of them picked this up, but then increasingly you see that where citizens are supposed to be demanding a lot of accountability, the political parties shy away from uptaking some of the recommendations that have been made. Even though the Constitution speaks to the fact that they should ensure that they do this, we do not see it happen. We have seen that in many of the instances, our legislations also make it very difficult for us to demand accountability when it comes to the fight against corruption. So we have ineffective measures. We have a law, the Criminal Offences Code, that critically mentions or describes corruption as bribes, and many critical elements which constitute corrupt behavior are not there. So when we go into the fight against corruption, it becomes very difficult. And we have seen over time how the OSP is struggling to stick some of the charges against people who have been brought to their attention. Again, whistleblowing, where the citizen is supposed to be playing a critical role, has not seen much gains. And we have continuously put this, the UN Convention speaks to it, the AU Convention speaks to it, and we have a law that passed in 2006 promoting whistleblowing. In 2019, we also passed a law to protect witnesses who come before the state to support the state in defense. Unfortunately, we have not popularized it very well, and also because of the attitudes and cultural perceptions of people who blow the whistle and we seeing them as snitches, that level of accountability is also not being maximized, despite the fact that civil society has continuously done a lot of education and awareness raising around the subject matter. In a year, you don't see much happening. Civil society has put in place mechanisms to promote this. The state has a lot of avenues to ensure this. Again, if you look at the law, the persons to whom declarations are made are a little questionable. We have state institutions going into assemblymen, community opinion leaders, and the rest. We believe, and we've said this over time, that we need to change this situation to give more clarity to what we want from the Whistleblowing Act, and to also continue to encourage citizens to blow the whistle as they should. We in the Ghana Integrity Initiative can say that we started an ALAC, the Advocacy and Legal Advice Center. And it is true that even though the Afrobarometer and the Global Corruption Barometer would indicate that citizens continue to say there is a fear of reporting corruption, it's also beginning to show in recent past from the data that citizens are willing to report corruption if they are sure of confidentiality and if they are sure that the issues they report would be taken up and would be dealt with, investigated, and the culprits sanctioned if they so should be. So it is not doom all along. Sorry. We see some prospects in the whistleblowing arena because we have received a lot of complaints, and these complaints have come to resolution. So for us going forward, we believe that, number one, our legislation on corruption from the Criminal Offences Act, which makes corrupt behavior mostly about 90% corruption, should change so that per the best practice and from the UNCAC, we should see other elements, including unexplained wealth, illicit enrichment, being added so that people who take the state for granted, as citizens demand, they can't be able to hold them to account from these. Again, from the law, if we have a definition of corruption that is expanded to fight corruption, then citizens can play their role as well effectively. When it comes to whistleblowing, where citizens make their contributions significantly, we have also asked for the fact that there is a need to ensure that the compensation regime that is spelled out in the law is activated so that people who make whistleblower complaints, which result in the recovery of proceeds, would be given that 10% that is supposed to be. And we see that this government has initiated that, but as to whether we are going to activate it is another thing. But we believe that when that happens, then people who see corruption would be willing to speak up against corruption, both in wherever they find themselves, either in their workplaces or in their communities. So to conclude, let me say that civil society, the citizenry, and also public sector, private sector have a role to play in the fight against corruption and the demand for accountability. If we pick what happens in other models, we co-create our situations, and then we all participate in ensuring that we come to consensus on what exactly it is we want to be working on when it comes to fighting corruption and promoting accountability. Then we would be making some very significant gains in this fight going forward. Until then, we say that our fight is more talk and very less action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very, very much for your thoughts on how do we center corruption into our journey beyond election 2024. And you have some suggestions relative to what changes need to take place in legislation. For instance, to expand the scope of definition of what corruption is, to invite illicit or unexplained, wealth, etc. You also have some thoughts on what role civil society can play in the fight against corruption within the political class. Thank you very much. We've done more than our time because we've tended to go beyond the 10 minutes. I'll go to Dr. Mohammed Suleiman to take the next 10 And he is telling us about what happens beyond today's conversation. What role can the Center for Alternative Politics and Security play in ensuring that we are able to do something more than electocracy? Mohammed, your 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Yeboah-Benin, and thanks to our audience. And I would like to thank Professor Kwesi for making the time to join us today, and to all the
Mohammed,
panelists.
if you would just humor me for a second. So while Mohammed is speaking, let me invite questions, because when he's done, we will start the Q&A, the interactive session. So if you have questions, perhaps you can start thinking about them and even to post them in the chat room if you so want. Mohammed, you can go on.
Thank you very much. As the moderator has mentioned, this event, as you all know, is organized by the Center for Alternative Politics and Security. And I would like to thank the entire team for making this happen. But I also like to acknowledge the support of our partners. We have State Capacity and Citizenship Building Research Center, whose co-founder, Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, is with us. And the other partner is On the Peace Africa, whose founder, Beatrice Baden, is also with us. Now, I would like to, first of all, before I come to what CAPSUA Center can do in this whole quagmire of decadent politics, if I may use that word, although cautiously, is to tell us about the state of democracy and governance from the regional level to the national level. The regional level being West Africa, but the national level a little bit about what is actually happening within Ghana, which has been touted as a model democracy in Africa and West Africa. Now, I want to highlight a few contradictions in the governance of our region. And I'm making specific references to specific cases. Now, first of all, I have 4 contradictions that I have observed in terms of the politics and the governance of West Africa. First, we go to Mali. In the late 1990s and the early 2000s, Mali was considered by many scholars as the bastion of democracy in West Africa. All right. The problem is, a decade later, that country has given up to both authoritarianism and instability of unusual proportions. All right, I want us to note the contradictions here. Second, a few months before the Nigerian coup, because there had been a coup in Burkina Faso, as well as in Mali, Niger stood out as the only trusted Western ally and a democracy in that region. But a few months later, when the coup happened, Niger is now led by a military leader, and it is considered by many as a rogue state. Now, the third contradiction that I would like to highlight is the fact that if I count from Operation Flintlock from 2005 to the G5 Sahel in 2022, there have been over a decade, over a dozen of programs and actions that are meant to bring governance and security inside of West Africa. But what we see on the flip side of things is that conflicts have worsened, existing ones, and new ones have started. Conflicts that were considered national are now regional, to the extent that coastal West African countries are now on edge regarding the impact that conflicts across the Sahel can have within their own countries. Now, the situation in the Sahel is only a manifestation of what is happening within the individual countries. So let us look at what is happening in Ghana, the country that we know we have been told is a model democracy by African standards. Now, Ghana's democracy is over 3 decades old. I mean, if we want to count from the starting of the Fourth Republic, we've had 5 presidents and 8 elections. Now, this election next month will be the 9th election in our country. But let us look at what this democracy has had to show for all these years and across all these presidents and all these elections. First, we still experience election-related violence. Okay, in 2020, for example, we had 5, fatalities coming from elections, at least 5. And then in 2016, there were violence across 86 constituencies, which is an increase from 47 in 2012. All right, and we have the case of legislators exchanging blows in the floor of Parliament, leading to an army invasion of Parliament to restore order. All right. Now we also have a lot of militia groups in our politics. I mean, we are told that since the inception of the Vigilante and Related Offences Act, these groups have stopped operating, but have they really stopped? All right. We also have a lot of high-profile assassinations, including the killing of a journalist in 2019. We've also had a certain MP being killed in what is largely considered by many as a politically motivated killing. All right. We also have a lot of ritual killing in Ghana. And there are 17 known ritual murders annually between 2013 and 2020, many involving child victims. All right. And of course, we remember the lynching of an officer in the Introboas in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the point here is, and by the way, there's also the case of excessive use of force by police, security officers, the killing of 2 Muslims and injuring 4 others during a protest in Nigeria is one of them. The killing of 7 Muslims supposedly wrongfully accused of being armed robbers is one of them. And then we have the proliferation of a lot of arms in our dear country. Now, we also have the issue of the Boko conflict happening and all of that. So if I were to go back to what Mavis mentioned initially, whether Ghana is a democracy with major problems or not a democracy at all, I would say that given all these things, we can just improvise a statement by Amy Sise when he mentioned in the discourse on colonialism that a civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent civilization. And a civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problems is a stricken civilization. I can say that a democracy that cannot solve the conflicts it creates is a questionable democracy, and a democracy that closes its eyes to the suffering of its people is one that needs alternative politics. So for us at the Center for Alternative Politics and Security, what is the problem? Whether we're looking at politics at the regional level or we're looking at it at the national level. We believe that the structures of politics have erected a boundary, a barrier between the citizenry and the elite who govern. And as a result, citizens are systematically disenfranchised. And I am also happy that Ben mentioned what was his term, monopsony, and all those other scary sounding words that he used, but which are nevertheless very legitimate, expositions regarding the politics that we practice in our dear country. Politics is transactional, okay? If you go to our friends, our brothers and sisters who sell in the streets of Accra, they will tell you that if they were approached by a buyer who asked them, how much is your product? And they tell them, our product, for example, 100 Ghana cedis, and in fact, the price is like 50. And if the buyer doesn't know the quality of the product they are going to buy, and if they don't know that the product should cost less than 100 cedis, they'll just pay because they don't know any better. They cannot tell, the quality of the product and how much the product should actually cost. Now, here we feel that if citizens are denied systematically the tools to take leaders to account, then it is almost impossible for there to be any meaningful change that can bring people-centered politics within the body politic of our country. So what is the solution? We feel that we need to bring people back in politics, whether we're talking about regional countries or, I mean, our dear country, Ghana. We need to bring people back into politics. We need to bring our communities back into politics. And we also need to bring our traditions back in politics. Now, bringing people back in politics means that we should remove the structures that erect barriers between the people and the center of politics, because most people are left in the margins of politics and they cannot, I mean, really meaningfully have impact on the structures, on the practice of politics within our country. The communities, all right, and under the people, we forget that the youth are a significant chunk of our population. Women are, to a larger extent, the foundations of our economy. All right, and yet the structures sort of disenfranchises this critical segment of Ghanaian society and pushes them to the fringes of politics. The community, and there are traditions. The Fourth Republic is a neoliberal republic. You know, are there any alternatives within our culture, our traditions, our communities, our history that we can bring to the center of politics to make up for the failures of the liberal idea? Not to say that take the liberal idea and just throw it out through the window, but to look at it and given all these problems that we have enumerated, how can we bring, you know, alternatives from within, not from without, to make sure that our democracy is actually functioning very well? Now, I'd like to conclude by suggesting things that, talking about things that the Center for Alternative Politics and Security West Africa has done or intends to do. First, we believe that we need to mentor peace. Peace and stability and democracy, we need to mentor it from the very early years of our lives. So we have a program called Mentoring Peace, where we actually go to schools, institutions, and talk to young Ghanaians who are now coming up. And as we all know, the leaders we have in parliament today, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years back, they were in those very institutions. We also talk about parenting peace. We are not only mentoring peace, but we want to parent peace. And this is a project that we haven't started, but we feel that if we were to get the right support, we can then begin to talk peace and democracy to our parents before they even let the children that they give birth to come into the societies and have whatever impact that they should have. Now, I would like to end here by saying that our philosophy in making sure that all these changes that we speak of materialize is to talk about politics, because we cannot separate politics and security. Is to talk about human security, because the reason why we do our job, our work, is for the people. It is a human world that we want to create, a world of reciprocal recognitions, if I were to quote Frantz Fanon. And finally, we want to highlight indigeneity, bringing the indigenous traditions of Ghanaians and West Africans a little bit to the center of politics, to complement whatever we have from the neoliberal idea. I am happy to provide further comments as we go forward. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Dan Suleiman, for giving us a sense of why CAPSWA has come into existence and what agenda it will be prosecuting. And I dare say that it fits in very nicely to the discussions that have come up, because as we listen to our panelists, we get the sense that something has got to change. They've shared some thoughts about what needs to change, what kinds of amendments can we make at the legislative level, at the people level, etc., etc. And so perhaps to say that I have regained hope, because with civil society organizations such as CAPSWA, then perhaps we can be a bit more mindful in pursuing a democracy that is way powerful beyond what the electocracy we're practicing at the present is giving us. So at this point, we have opportunity to take some questions, and I'll go to the audience. If you have a question to ask me, feel free to raise your hand to indicate, and then I'll call attention to you. In the meantime, though, I see some questions already posted on the in the chats, and so I'll read some of them and direct them to some of the speakers. So somebody is asking, it says, due to partyism and affiliations, most young politicians have become stomachers. That is, they think about what they will get to feed themselves. As a result, they are afraid to speak against corruption or bad governance. The question you pose after this preamble is, how can we awaken the minds of the youth to be able to hold their leaders responsible and to shape the political system of Ghana in the future? How do we get the youth to sit up and to take an active role in defining the political future of Ghana? Ben, shall I come to you, since you described yourself as somebody who has been here throughout your time and as youth? You used that word, if I caught you correctly. So I'll come back to you to help us think about, how do we rein in the youth? How do we get them interested in sitting in the driving seat? We've already begun to see signs of that. I mean, the recent demonstrations, etc., tell us that our youth are mobilizing, and they are interested in becoming key and active participants in defining the future of Ghana. How can we get more of that without, of course, the pain that such picketing and attacks on young people can bring?
Thank you very much, Prof. And I must say that there's significant youth involvement in politics and has always been. It just so happens that that involvement has not necessarily been from outside of the interested parties. When I talk about the primary interested parties, I'm talking about the political parties. The strength of any political party in this country, at least during this Fourth Republic, has been based on the strength of its youth groupings. And so it got to a point where all of them found the need to have the national youth organizer position. And you find it at the regional level, at the constituency level, even at the polling station levels. So youth have always been involved. The real question has been, how have they been involved? The youth have significantly been used as pawns in the chess game of the real power brokers, being those who are at the helm of these various political parties. The person who asked the question talks about how lots of the actions of the youth have been stomach driven. So if there isn't economic empowerment, then one's political involvement will be for the economic goal, primary economic goal, which will be looking at self and not at the state. And so with what happened recently, for instance, in the case of the Stop Galamsey Now walk or protest that took place, the youth found how close the problem is. So it went beyond a certain personal interest, but they realized that even beyond they as individuals, their families are directly impacted. Their entire generation is impacted, and the generation after them is also impacted. Once an issue gets to the point where we realize it is not just us, but it affects a greater chunk of people connected to us, then we are likely to be awoken. We have had constitutional instruments like, and when I say constitutional body, I should say constitutional body like the NCC, which is supposed to be mandated with the responsibility of civic education. It is significantly strained by way of resources to do that. So we have the opportunity of social media platforms. We have the opportunity of some of these civil society organizations like CAPSWA, where a lot more political literacy would have to be significantly engendered over time, and also opportunities created for economic empowerment so that the youth, in their quest to be politically involved, are not going to be those who are going to be used as pawns. Because our political dispensation is known for a certain term known as babies with sharp teeth. These persons were youth, and they have been involved in politics, but how were their involvement? It was to the detriment of the state and the politicking that we have in the state. So for me, the real solutions are building economic empowerment for the youth grouping, and two, creating a significant civic and political awareness as to the right ways to be politically involved.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ben. So let's take advantage of the mobilizing force of new media, he argues, perhaps to re-empower and energize the NCCE to do better its civic education and mobilization work. And also, can we look to the power of civil society in engendering political literacy and also drawing the youth's interest? But while we do that, can we make sure that the youth are not asking bread and butter questions? If there's not economic empowerment, then chances are that even as we rope them into active politics, their stomach may be leading them. Thank you very much, Ben, for that question. I go to Abigail in Tuba, and she is asking, how do we circumvent external influence of powerful corporations? Let me expand this beyond corporations to also be powerful countries. So how do we circumvent the external influence of, the influence of external powers in our elections? That's what she is asking. The power they wield in swaying the results of our elections in one direction or the other. So that's from Abigail. Perhaps let me come to Mary. Mary, what would be your thoughts on this? The influence, rent-seeking, that seems to be taking a hold in our politics, and we know just how dangerous the consequences can be. Mary, let me come to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I believe rent-seeking behavior has been with us for a very long time, and we as a people have also encouraged it because of the economic gains we make, and particularly looking at the spaces around the globe. But we can work towards ensuring that we are more accountable, we are more independent, and we take the processes on our own. And we can only do that if we speak up. These external influences could be ensuring that people are well-resourced to campaign to win elections so that they make their gains afterwards. And this has been the issues we have dealt with. And I mentioned serious and organized crime as well as one of them. And this is another source of worry. So how do we curb these? Our regimes must be very clear. And also, apart from being very clear, the clarity then would lead to the institutions who are more empowered and who are willing to take up the mantle of leadership to do their work. So I'm mandated to ensure that I curb any instances of serious and organized crime. The Electoral Commission should also take its role very seriously by ensuring that the accounting that is supposed to be done is done by our political actors in order to be able to trace the sources of funding, to trace the sources of donations that come to these parties. Because at the end of the day, when a rent is being sought, it is for the future purposes, and we all suffer for it. So let's put in more punitive measures when investigations are done and concluded, so that we see more compliance in these regimes. Because we continue to see that people get away, and when people get away, then the tendency that people do it the more is there. We have had instances where political actors have asked, how do we say we know the source of funding that is coming to us? That's one. How do we know the intention behind what a person is trying to do? It's also because we do not have clarity within the regime. So for us, we believe that this is an opportunity to stand together to ensure that we have a regime in place, so that going forward, we can stand on that to leverage all the powers of civil society and everybody to ensure that we are curbing this phenomenon without any hesitation at all. But to do that successfully, we need the political will to be able to support. Otherwise, we'll just be working against ourselves. Because remember, this economy is a procurement one, and most of the rent-seeking behaviors are, if you are tracing, they go back towards them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. The next question is from Abdul Basit, and he is asking whether, given Ghana's current political governance challenges, we can expect any meaningful commitment from the two major political parties, the NDC and the NPP. Can we expect any commitment from them towards a constitutional review? It's come up when either of them has been in government, but we are still at starting point. So can we expect anything meaningful from them? But more importantly, if that commitment is not there, what other approaches can we use to ensure that we move closer to a better constitution that serves our interests? So on the one hand, could we expect anything from NDC and NPP? Are we not joking in sitting here and expecting constitutional reforms from either of those two? But in the event we agree that is not going to happen on their watch, what can we do about it? Mohammed, let me come to you on this.
Yeah, Prof, I was hoping that you wouldn't ask me to answer this question, but you have just asked me to. So I have the unenviable responsibility of responding. I am usually, seen by my colleagues as a prophet of doom when it comes to the future of politics in Africa more broadly. And that is because I have held the view that although human agency has a lot to do, like in terms of change, in our part of the world, I think we have empowered the structures of politics so much that those structures have rendered human agency or political agency somewhat impotent to a significant extent, not entirely. And when you have structures that systematically disempower the people, then if those structures decide not to change themselves, by the few elites who are closest to those structures, then the people are left helpless. This is not to disrespect the agency of citizens, but we are talking in relative terms here. They are left helpless in exacting the change that they want in politics. So, can we expect any meaningful change from our political parties in Ghana? Look, I don't want to be too alarmist and be too pessimistic, but I think with these current structures of politics, I think we've heard from Benjamin, and he's done a very good job telling us how lopsided our political structures are. He's told us everything that I think we need to know about the way structures in Ghana are recently set. I believe that if those structures don't change their identity, then it will be very hard for us to to expect any meaningful really change from both political parties. But there is a window of hope if any of the political parties have leaders who is human, but we are all human, but human enough to take into consideration the suffering of Ghanaians, the plight of Ghanaians, what you see if you walk in the streets of Ghana, of people, of mothers, of youth who are really struggling and are really screaming in silence and are not being heard. If we have someone like that coming to redeem the situation, then we can expect something meaningful. But for now, I am not really very hopeful. I'm sorry, but I want to be proven wrong going forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. I'll go to Mavis on the same question because we want to finish on a note where we feel we can do something and with some clarity on what we also can do. Mavis, the research has given us some sense of the nature of the problem. What can we do with that research to activate the changes towards to activate constitutional review? What can we do? What happens beyond evidence so that we don't leave it to the whims and caprices of the NDC and the NPP, which, as Mohammed is saying, we cannot quite have hope with them? Maybe.
I think already there have been a lot of discussions around constitutional reforms even before this current manifesto that seems to be promising us so much on it. For me, going forward, we can't leave it in the hands of the politicians. We need to build coalitions around that and push for it to happen. We need to, as citizens and civil society, act and lead instead of just allowing the politicians, especially whoever wins the power. We shouldn't just wait for them to take up the initiative of a reform, but we should be able to push for it. And also begin to educate a lot of citizens around these reform issues and what it means, the implications for our democracy. Yes.
Thank you, Mavis. I have a last question and then we will round up the discussion. This is also from Abdul Basit, and he's wondering whether perhaps the road to the changes that we seek could come from the state taking an active interest in the finances of political parties by financing political parties. Could that help, for instance, to reduce the hostage to which we have been held? Could we look at state financing of political parties as a way to solving some of the challenges we have identified this morning? I'll come back to Mary because you speak on corruption, etc. And we know that some of the ways in which monies are making their way into political parties are problematic. Would the state's interest solve the problem? Mary, and then we'll round up.
Yes, so Prof, this has its pros and cons. And we have seen, even in very developed societies, that it has not been the panacea to the fight against corruption and wrongdoing. So for us in Ghana, we have seen some elements of the state supporting in some logistics in the past, providing vehicles to political parties. But I can tell you that from the research so far, it's not the best route we should pick. One of the best routes we should, and I mentioned it before, is the fact that we should have the regime that demands more accountability from political parties, ensuring that we have very clear laid down regimes for them to speak to, where the sources of funding is from, and then we also limit or cap the funding sources that come to them. When we do that, we should be able to fight corruption in our elections, or the issue, solve the issue of campaign financing. In other dispensations, it's been good where they've tried to fund, but you can imagine what would happen in Ghana if 30 people or 50 people decide to compete. That is a route we would want to go. But then if the political parties, I believe it's possible, because in that case, then we would also then be thinking that perhaps we need to cap the campaign period, and we need to also put a very stringent regime in place to ensure that we have fewer parties participating. But that also has the disadvantage of eliminating prospective candidates from contesting. So it's a two-way thing, but for me, I believe we are not ready to take up that duty of funding political parties fully. We just need to find a way to ensure that we are putting more clarity and putting stringent measures in place to ensure that we have a more robust regime that helps us to fight corruption in elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that response. So not too clear that financing the political parties is the way to go. And besides, quite honestly, when my street is not yet tarred, why do I want my taxes to be used to finance a political party is the question that is running around in my head. I'll go around to the panelists and take their concluding thoughts, but I only can afford 2 minutes per panelist, so please keep to time. We promised to finish this by 12:30. We are already at 47. And so please stick to your 2 minutes that I'm giving you. Very brief concluding thoughts. Prof. Enin, I'll come to you first. If you have any concluding thoughts, you've listened to the discussions that have taken place. If you have any concluding thoughts, please, let's hear you. And you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, Prof.
I'm not sure I can hear him. Am I the only one?
No, so Prof actually sent a private message that he had an appointment. Yeah, so he left. I mean, I think I should have alerted you. So
that's okay. In which case, Mavis, I'll come to you. Your concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite important to know, isn't it? Like, how many words?
My concluding remarks would be that going forward, we would need to think around how to bring citizens involved. Citizens need to be educated, strengthen citizen engagement, civil society engagement as well, and media education around the issues of governance processes, structures, and how citizens, the avenues available for citizen engagement, the avenue available for us to get our grievances addressed, and when they are not addressed, what we can do about it. And we shouldn't let only the politicians lead in the governance of the country. but we should be able to lead as citizens as well. We should have our inputs and our voices in our governance, policy, and development.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking to the time. Let me go to Benjamin. Benjamin, what do you want to leave with us?
So from the research that the Afrobarometer has given us, it is evident that there's some level of growing apathy amongst the youth and then the female grouping. And this is just to try to respond to two questions at the same time. The question of whether the NDC and MPP, we can trust them to lead with constitutional amendments. We cannot. The evidence does not support that. And it would only take a certain level of pressure to get solutions. And so our despondency should not lead us to apathy. Rather, it should lead us to action to get the duty bearers to do more. And this we can do strongly through advocacy, through activism, which is properly guided. And we are sure that whichever party is in power, they will be eventually forced to take some actions about our constitution.
Thank you very much. And now let me go to Mary. Mary.
So, Prof, I would end by saying that, again, I wanted to hit on the constitutional review. It is the only way we can be able to work around this quagmire we find ourselves in. And so no matter what would happen, the citizen has to begin to speak up and leave our apathetic seats and begin to take action. So it's a concerted effort between citizens, civil society, and all the actors out there to ensure that we have this constitutional review to take the absolute powers of the president away, to ensure that we are able to fight corruption and promote citizens' participation the way it should be and the way it's done in other places. I believe that with a multi-stakeholder approach, each and everyone coming to the table, we would be able to do this. But we need citizens to begin to ask the questions and demand their due as the Constitution spells out. Thank you.
Excellent stuff. Finally, I come to Dr. Mohammed Dan Suleiman.
Thank you very much, Prof. And Ben, thank you for suggesting that we cannot trust the MPP and NDC, because I was beginning to feel like I was the only one who was being too pessimistic. But I guess these last comments, allow me to clarify that by highlighting the structure and how the structure is superimposed upon us, I am not denying the role of agency, which is the citizens. That is why, I guess, speaking to the question about financing political parties, I think that doing so wouldn't help, because when you finance political parties, you are still financing the elites. What I would suggest it's done is to finance civic education, because as Benjamin, you mentioned, power concedes nothing without demand. Now, it is the demand aspect of that transactional politics that we need to, strengthen. And I believe that we need to, channel a large chunk of our resources to empowering the people to really then make their way to the center of politics and then demand the accountability that they so deserve within the policy. And that is something that the Center for Alternative Politics and Security, we intend to support others do it ourselves with the support and partnership of many others within Ghana and, of course, within the West Africa sub-region.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for your concluding thoughts. And thank you also to all the panelists for sharing their concluding thoughts. As moderator, I have learned a few things that I'd like to share with you. I'm sure you have your own lessons, and the conversations should continue. So at the center of it all, it would seem to me from this discussion is a citizen, and the driving seat that citizen must be empowered to take. Empowered through civic education, empowered perhaps through media and information literacy education, empowered through financial literacy education so that they know the right questions to ask to hold the powers to account, so that the citizen is at the very center of it all. And that empowered citizen who then becomes actively involved can then drive us closer to demanding reviews in our constitution, reviews that reduce the appointive powers of the presidency, reviews that perhaps, as Benjamin suggested, takes a bit more of an interest in the media that have access to people's minds, their eyes, and their ears. But I also hear a lot of focus on the role civil society can play, particularly through a multi-stakeholder approach that leverages all the strengths of different civil society groupings. So beyond Ghana's election 2024, I get the sense that the agreement in this room is that we cannot afford business as usual. Something has got to change, and that change has to move us towards a democracy where people sit in the driving seat because they've become actively interested, they exercise their participation, and they demand that the powers they invest in people are used to service them. I have learned a lot. I hope that you have too. But there is more to this discussion than just a discussion. We're looking for action. And so my hope is that beyond today's panel discussion, those of us here and the many, many groupings that we represent or are part of mobilize our resources, our efforts towards moving Ghana closer to a point where we are all happy to call home. I have enjoyed this discussion. I really hope that you have too. I am Abena Nimwaye Benin. I work with the University of Ghana. We do quite a lot of work in media and information literacy and media development. If your strengths align in this direction, join us so that we can help educate Ghanaians so that they can hold their powerful people to account. Thank you very much. Mohammed, I'll hand over to you. Perhaps you have some announcements or acknowledgements to make. Thank you.
Beatrice? Hello,
Yes,
Beatrice?
yes,
Yeah,
I'm
go
here.
ahead.
Okay. Well, so thank you very much. I was just having a chat behind the scenes, and I just kept saying that, look, I think that Doc Abna has done literally everything that I need to do in terms of summarizing. So Doc, thank you so much for making my work so easy. Indeed, if we want a new path towards our democracy, if we want to change from business as usual, then it's all about placing people at the center of our politics. It's definitely about making Ghanaians more relevant to the activities of our politicians, and not just about they coming every 4 years to come and see our faces, have a discourse with us and move away. It's all also about making a conscious effort to ensure that we have an active citizenry participating in our political parties to add that level of credibility to our Ghanaian politics. And so it's also more about holding our leaders accountable. It's also about digitizing the process, our electoral process, to ensure that our people are more involved in it. And so I would say a very big thank you to all our panelists. First of all, to Professor Kwesi Enin, even though he's not here, for launching Kapsua, which has come to stay to do a lot more work in terms of moving forward our governance process. We want to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Abena Eniwa Yabua Benin, for also that yeoman's work that he did. Very good moderation. We are very appreciative of you. To Mrs. Mary Awilani Ada, to Mr. Benjamin Ofe Ado, to Miss Mavis Domit. Let me just hold on to the middle name. I don't want to butcher Medae. And then to, of course, Dr. Mohammed Dan Suleimani. We say a very big thank you to you all for those insights, and also to our partners. Of course, this couldn't have been possible without your input as well. We look forward to this discourse continuing. This is just the beginning. This is just setting the tone for a lot more interesting discussions that you should look forward to. On this note, I would say do have a pleasant afternoon. Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I think that's pretty much it. We thank all of you for your time, and we shall be contacting you so we can work together in promoting alternative politics, people-centered politics in Ghana and West Africa going forward. Thank you very much for your time.